Good morning. It's great to see so many of you here. For those of you who are not part of the Pace community, I'm Steve Friedman. I'm president of Pace University. We're very delighted that Senator John Edwards has chosen Pace as the venue for this important policy address. And it's particularly nice to welcome him back here. 4 years ago, this month, he stood on this stage as one of 10 Democratic presidential candidates in one of the series of debates. And of course, he went on to become the Democratic candidate for Vice President of the United States. Pace has a deep commitment to civic engagement at a whole variety of levels. In our approach to higher education, we emphasize the public and community commitment and involvement and treat that as an important part of the educational process. We take very seriously the role of universities generally and this university as centers for discussion and debate of the most important public policy issues of our time. And more broadly, we and our community, our students and our faculty are participants in the national conversation about the future of America, of our society, and of the world. We look for opportunities for our students to actually see and feel and breathe and touch the political process, and this discussion this morning, I think, is a perfect example of that. John Edwards' life story is in many ways the embodiment of the Pace motto of opportunitas. He's someone with whom many of our students can identify, although I confess there are some differences between growing up in New York City and growing up in the small town in North Carolina where he grew up. His father worked in the textile mills for 36 years. His mother ran a small shop and worked in the local post office. He was the first in his family to go to college, which was true of many of our students. He went to North Carolina State University, and then he studied law at Chapel Hill at the University of North Carolina, one of the great universities and great law schools in our country. At Chapel Hill, he was director of the Center on Poverty, Work, and Opportunity. And then after Chapel Hill, he practiced law for 20 years. He represented families and children largely in litigation against large companies and powerful centers in our country, including a lot of insurance companies. At one point in my career, I was general counsel of an insurance company, and I can tell you that he was a formidable force. In 1998, he was elected to the United States Senate. He played an important role in many of the issues that are of great concern to everyone at this university: education, health care, Social Security, the environment, and campaign finance reform. He has been an eloquent advocate for the poor and the disadvantaged and the middle class in America. So we are very, very happy to have him with us. We are also very pleased to have with us Kristen Breitweiser. She is a friend of Senator Edwards. Ms. Breitweiser's husband, Ron, was lost in the attacks on September 11th, and those attacks have transformed her life and the lives of so many of us. Before that event, she was a stay-at-home mom in New Jersey raising her daughter. And she and many other 9/11 widows were transformed by their grief and by their outrage at what seemed to be a lack of accountability. And she and others are widely credited with forcing the appointment of the 9/11 Commission. I'm sure many of you have read at least the conclusions of that report, and with being important factors in the passage by the Congress of legislation that implemented many of those recommendations. She has been a friend and a supporter of Senator Edwards since that time, and she will be delivering his formal introduction this morning. So please join me in welcoming Kristen Breitweiser.
Thank you, President Friedman. It's very exciting to be here this afternoon to endorse John Edwards' bold new counterterrorism initiative, an initiative that turns us away from a foreign policy that has failed us and moves us towards a new direction that ensures all American families will be safer in the future. And frankly speaking, if I were any of the other presidential candidates, Republican or Democrat, I would be paying close attention to what John will be saying to us here today. Because his plan is smart, his plan is creative, and most importantly, his plan is bold. Smart, creative, and bold. Three things that we must have in our thinking when it comes to creating and crafting new counterterrorism policies. Three things that have been noticeably lacking in our foreign policy planning for the past 6 years. 6 long years from 9/11, our nation still stands at great risk from groups like Al-Qaeda. We are sadly not fully prepared for the next terrorist attack. Too many innocent lives will be taken. Too much property will be damaged. Too much devastation will undoubtedly ensue. Why? Because our president and our Congress have failed to make us safe as we can be from a terrorist attack. Our president and Congress have failed to learn valuable lessons. They have failed to truly make national security, securing our homeland from terrorist attack, a priority in the last 6 years since 9/11. The truth is that President Bush and the Republicans had an opportunity to unite the world after the attacks on September 11th. They simply failed to do so. They failed to garner worldwide support. They failed to eliminate the proliferation of loose nukes and biological components. They failed to decrease the amount of soft targets within our own borders. They failed to establish a sound, smart terrorism strategy. They failed to decrease our dependency on foreign oil from nations that support and/or sponsor Islamic extremism. They failed to hold anyone, any system, or any country fully accountable. They even failed to capture Osama bin Laden, dead or alive. What the Republicans and President Bush have done in the 6 long years since is bring us into a senseless and unjustified war in Iraq that has emboldened the terrorists, squandered our precious resources, and ultimately left us isolated from the rest of the world. And to someone like me, a 9/11 widow who knows firsthand the repercussions of bad judgment when it comes to foreign policy, the foreign policy of the Bush administration in the past 6 years has been dangerous, deadly, and wholly unacceptable. What I like about John Edwards' foreign policy plan is that it is a call to action. It is a plan that is not based on fear. It is a realistic plan with smart ideas rooted in sound judgment. It gives us real steps that will yield real results, the kind of results that will save lives and make us safer from terrorist attack. I only wish that we had this sort of plan in place before 9/11, because such a bold plan would have gone a long way in thwarting terrorist attacks like 9/11 and saving thousands of innocent lives, including the life of someone like my husband. I came here today because John and Elizabeth Edwards are my friends. I respect and admire both of them enormously. They speak plainly, honestly, and from the heart. They care, genuinely care, about people like you and me. They don't test the political winds before they speak or take a political position. They speak candidly and act with real conviction. Some people might have a problem with that. I sure don't. I call it courage. I call it bold. I call it leadership. And so it is with great privilege and honor that I now introduce to you my good friend, Senator John Edwards.
you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you all very much for being here. It's a great honor for me to be with you on this beautiful New York day. And I also want to say a personal thank you to Kristen, who's a woman of extraordinary strength and courage, and who's shown that strength and courage repeatedly after her husband lost his life on September the 11th. And I've had the great privilege of spending time with her, as has Elizabeth, over the last few years. And we need more people in America like Kristen Breitweiser, who speak their mind and who have the strength of their conviction, and who, in the face of an extraordinary personal tragedy, has shown what one person can do. And I just want to return the wonderful things she said about myself and about Elizabeth. We consider Kristen our friend, and I admire and respect her enormously. On a beautiful, bright September day 6 years ago, a group of 19 men stepped into 4 airplanes, intending to kill as many people as they could, and with the absolute intent of terrorizing America. Just a few blocks from here, the hijackers crashed their extraordinarily terrible ideology into the American dream. Nearly 3,000 Americans died on that horrible day in New York City, in Arlington, Virginia, and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. They were bankers and busboys, secretaries, firemen, and they were all our brothers and sisters. Their sacrifice is a harsh and lasting reminder of what must become one of the great goals of our generation: the need to protect our citizens from these kind of horrors, to root out and shut down terrorist cells wherever they fester, to remove the poverty and the instability that give radicalism a toehold, and to make terrorism utterly unacceptable among nations everywhere for all time. In August of 2001, while George Bush was in Crawford, Texas, ignoring memos about the threat from al-Qaeda, I wrote an op-ed piece in which I named terrorism as the most vital national security challenge our country would face in the coming years. I still believe that. The world stood united behind America after September the 11th, as Kristen just spoke about. But instead of leading a truly visionary campaign against global terrorism, our president led America down a garden path. He used the attacks to justify a preconceived war against a nation he now admits had no ties to al-Qaeda. He then offered belligerence and hostility to the world community, and we have been rewarded in kind, and the world has responded in kind. President Bush, like the Republicans following him today, and even, unfortunately, some Democrats, was stuck in the past, and he still is stuck in the past. He had no grasp of the new threats we faced, and so he failed to offer a vision to keep us safe in a world that's changed. Saddam Hussein was the threat he knew, so Iraq was the war he waged. We need new thinking and a bold vision to protect the world for our children. Instead, George Bush literally gave us his father's war, but without his father's allies and without his father's sense of decency. What's more and what's worse, the so-called war on terror he used as an excuse for the war in Iraq, as an excuse for trampling on our Constitution, and most perversely for ignoring the demands of the actual struggle that exists against terrorism. Because in George Bush's reality, disagreement is called weak, challenge is suspect, and opposition is downright unpatriotic. 6 years later, the devastating consequences of Bush's war on terror are so clear that his own administration has had to admit them. A recent national intelligence estimate found that al-Qaeda is now just as strong as it was before September the 11th. In a recent survey of America's most respected foreign policy experts, the vast majority said the world was becoming more dangerous for Americans in the United States. The State Department recently released a study showing that terrorism has increased worldwide 25% in 2006, including a 40% surge in civilian fatalities. And as everyone knows, as Kristen just spoke about, Osama bin Laden is still at large. 6 years ago, President Bush declared that he wanted bin Laden dead or alive. This is his starkest failure. Apparently, bin Laden plans to address America on the anniversary of September the 11th. But I don't need to wait and hear what this murderer has to say. My position is clear. I can make one absolute and solemn promise to America. As President, I will never rest until we have hunted down bin Laden and served him justice. But George Bush's approach to terrorism has not only failed to make the world safer, it has demolished the very foundation of America's foreign policy, our relationship with other countries. In the first Gulf War, our allies shared the cost of troops, casualties, and funding. But in the current Iraq War, the Bush approach left us largely on our own, bearing almost the entire burden. Tragically for America and for the rest of the world, George Bush's war on terror approach walked directly into the trap that the terrorists had set for us. Islamic extremists wanted to frame the conflict with the U.S. as a war of civilizations. And the Bush administration, stuck in the Cold War mentality, they completely complied with what these people wanted. There is now only one key question we have to ask ourselves. Are we any closer to getting rid of terrorism than we were 6 years ago? And the answer to that is no. In fact, we're further away. Today, terrorism is worse in Iraq and it's worse around the world. So what does all this mean? It means that the results are in on George Bush's so-called global war on terror. And it's not just a failure, it is a double-edged failure. The Bush approach hasn't only made the terrorist problem worse, the administration has rigidly stuck to outdated approaches that are completely ineffective against the modern terrorist threat that all of us face. We need a counterterrorism policy that will actually counter terrorism. That matches 21st century threats against the 21st century tactics that we need to employ. That replaces Cold War thinking designed to defeat a single enemy with New World thinking that can defeat a multinational, diverse, and often hidden foe. Not just now, but over the long term. That's strong, fast, and hard enough to stop terrorists cold today, but also smart, honest, and visionary. Visionary enough to draw people away from terrorism in the first place. And to do all this, we have to do one thing. We've got to throw away the failed George Bush policies of the past and move boldly in a completely new direction. Instead of Cold War institutions designed to win traditional wars and protect traditional borders, we need new institutions designed to share intelligence, cooperate across borders, and take out small, hostile groups. Instead of a foreign policy of convenience that readily does business with whoever's available and regularly turns a blind eye when our allies wrongly fail to cooperate, we need a new foreign policy of conviction that requires cooperation in exchange for our support, whether it's arms sales, trade, or foreign aid. Instead of an exclusively short-term focus on the enemy we know, we need a long-term strategy to win the minds of those who are not yet our enemies by offering education, democracy, opportunity, in place of radicalism, hatred, and fear. Most of all, instead of a reckless solo pursuit of an ideological agenda that abandons America's moral authority and disregards our allies, we need to re-engage with the world, and we need to reassert America's moral leadership in the world. In a few short days, we'll all take time to remember September the 11th. This year, we should all make the anniversary not only a time for mourning, but of reflection on the very real choices that all of us face. We learned on September the 11th the consequences of not dealing with the threat of terrorism. You will have a very real choice to make in this election, and the choice will have consequences. You and your children will have to live with the decisions we make in the next 4 years. There is no doubt that some progress has been made. We should thank the professionals who have uncovered plots like the one at JFK Airport. Our federal government has been substantially rearranged and some problems corrected. But we should not let our enthusiasm for short-term victories cloud what is clearly the long-term reality. The fact is that George Bush has used 20th century tools to attack 21st century problems. The Bush approach has failed not only because of the shameless political manipulations and reckless decisions of the President and his aides. It's failed because the President is using an antiquated set of weapons against a modern target, and he's misfiring. Some politicians, like Rudolph Giuliani, Mitt Romney, and John McCain, have responded to the shortcomings and backfires of this administration's approach by essentially doubling down. They've closed their eyes to the facts, and they've asked us to accept on faith more of the Bush approach. Some running for the Democratic nomination have even argued that the Bush-Cheney approach has made us safer. It has not. For the sake of our nation's security and for the sake of building a safer America, we have to take a new direction. We need a bold new approach, one that's smart, tough, and targeted. This will require us to look beyond the structure of World War II and the Cold War to new tools that will allow us to target terrorism more precisely. It will also require substantial and sustained U.S. leadership, but the kind that leverages the power of partnerships rather than going it alone. It will mean raising the level of cooperation between law enforcement and intelligence agencies while preserving civil liberties and the rule of law. We saw the promise of a new multilateral approach just a couple of days ago in Germany. The terrorists the German authorities caught were plotting massive attacks on American interests. They had been trained in Pakistan, had a network in Turkey, and were captured through American and German intelligence. We must be able to coordinate similar operations throughout the world, in the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and anywhere in the world that terrorists may attack. Now more than ever, the world is ready for a new direction from America. The world is ready to work together against terrorism. But right now, the community of nations lacks any global institution to coordinate counterterrorist intelligence and security operations. The international institutions of the last century were designed for World War II and the Cold War. Institutions like the United Nations, NATO, and Interpol have taken steps to adapt to the 21st century changes that we're faced with terrorism, and they do continue to serve an important purpose, and they remain essential to us meeting our needs. But they cannot be the complete and final answer. It is the right time for a bold new direction. As President, I will launch a comprehensive new counterterrorism policy that will be defined by two principles: strength and cooperation. The centerpiece of this policy will be a new multilateral organization called the Counterterrorism and Intelligence Treaty Organization, CETO. Every nation has an interest in shutting down terrorism. CETO will create connections between a wide range of nations on terrorism and intelligence, including countries on all continents: Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe. New connections between previously separate nations will be forged, creating new possibilities. CETO will allow members to voluntarily share financial, police, customs, and immigration intelligence. Together, nations will be able to track the way terrorists travel, communicate, recruit, train, and finance their operations. And they'll be able to take action through international teams of intelligence and national security professionals who will launch targeted missions to root out and shut down terrorist cells. The new organization will also create a historic new coalition. Those nations who join will, by working together, show the world the extraordinary power of cooperation. Those nations who join will also be required to commit to tough criteria about the steps that they will take to root out terrorists, particularly those who cross borders. Those nations who refuse to join will be called out before the world. It's important to note that CETO is not a panacea. I don't claim it to be, and it won't be perfect, but it would represent a big first step in the right direction. And as President Kennedy said when he signed the treaty that first limited the testing of nuclear weapons, we must begin with the common recognition of a common danger. President Kennedy said then, a journey of 1,000 miles must begin with a single step. Today, this new anti-terrorism organization would be such a first step. But organizations are only as strong as the people who help make them run, and so we have to improve the quality of our human intelligence. Agents better able to understand local culture and make local connections in countries with active terrorist cells. As President, I'll lead efforts to improve human intelligence through 1,000 new annual scholarships to improve language skills for students who pursue careers in intelligence and diplomacy. A terrorist should not be able to escape detection in Europe or in the Middle East if a foreign agency could have caught him with the help of American technology and advice. Within 6 months of taking office, I'll direct the Secretary of State working with the Attorney General and other national security officials to launch comprehensive strategies to support agencies in other countries who are actually cooperating with America. There is no more urgent task than preventing terrorists from acquiring nuclear weapons or any other weapon of mass destruction. And we will all be better off when the world is free of nuclear weapons. Diplomacy is key to progress in securing nuclear weapons. The recent agreement with North Korea to shut down their nuclear program in exchange for the release of frozen assets is long overdue, but it's encouraging. It is telling that the few successes of the Bush administration come from the very diplomacy that it's made fun of. As President, I'll create a global nuclear compact to strengthen the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which would support peaceful nuclear programs, improve security for existing stocks of nuclear materials, and ensure more frequent verification that materials are not being diverted and facilities are not being misused. And I'll lead an international effort to rid the world of nuclear weapons. I want to be the President of the United States who leads an effort to rid the world of nuclear weapons. Our chemical plants are also targets for terrorists. This is a subject, by the way, that Kristen has spoken eloquently about in the past. A successful attack on any of these chemical targets would be devastating for America. Because of industry pressure, new watered-down security rules imposed by the Bush administration may actually weaken security at many chemical plants. I believe that we need to implement tough new safety standards at these plants to prevent them from being as vulnerable as they are today to terrorist attacks. We also have to work harder at home to ensure that extremist ideologies do not take hold in our own Muslim communities. And we must do this in a way that respects diversity and civil liberties and avoids practices like racial profiling against both Arabs and Muslims. We should encourage American Muslim participation in public life. I will put new resources toward engaging American Muslims, empowering local mosques to counter extremist ideas, and working hand in hand with the Muslim community to identify and isolate threats. Finally, we must achieve energy independence in America. If we reduce our reliance on oil from unstable parts of the world, Middle Eastern regimes will finally diversify their economies and modernize their societies. And fighting global climate change will reduce global disruptions that could lead to tens of millions of refugees and create massive new breeding grounds for desperation and radicalism. There are those who are hardcore proponents of terror. We know that. And I've spoken here today about how we can deal with them. Yet we also must have a broader, deeper goal to prevent terrorism from taking root in the first place. Millions of people around the world today are sitting on the fence, particularly in the Muslim world. And on one side is bin Laden and al-Qaeda, and on the other side is America. The question is, which way will they go? That depends on us. If they perceive America as a bully, if they perceive us as selfish, only interested in the expansion of American power, it will drive them in the other direction. On the other hand, if they see us as the light, as the country that actually understands and meets its responsibility to humanity, as a country who actually wants to help them have a better life, to have hope in their lives, then it will pull them toward us like a magnet. We have to be that light again. We have to be the country that's worthy of leadership again. We need to do everything in our power to prevent this generation of potential friends from becoming potential enemies. Several months ago, I proposed a sweeping effort to eliminate the poverty and instability that create the conditions for extremism, including increasing our funding for global primary education to $3 billion a year so that we can make primary school education available to 100 million children in the world who have no education at all. expanding microfinance programs so that we make economic development available in other parts of the world, ramping up our support for sanitation and preventive health care, clean drinking water, things that we take for granted, but I know from personal experience, having worked in Africa, would make an enormous difference in stopping the spread of disease, and dramatically increasing our promotion of constitutional democracies and the rule of law across the developing world. And during my first year in office, I will establish a Marshal Corps, patterned after the military reserves, that will include at least 10,000 civilian experts. Its members will be deployed abroad to serve on reconstruction, stabilization, and humanitarian missions. Rethinking our approach to terrorism also means rethinking our approach country by country, cell by cell. And in each place where terrorism has taken root, there's a lot more that we need to do. We must begin with one of the greatest generators of terrorism in the world today, Iraq. George Bush's failed management of the war in Iraq has made the problem of terrorism worse. The war provided al-Qaeda with a powerful tool for recruitment. It gives them a battlefield for training. It gave them an attractive target in American troops. And it diverted the resources of the U.S. military, weakening our force structure in the process. Even though the presence of U.S. troops has served as an attractive target for terrorists, our eventual withdrawal will not remove the threat. As President, I will redeploy troops into quick reaction forces outside of Iraq to perform targeted missions against al-Qaeda cells and to prevent genocide or regional spillover of a civil war. We can neglect the crisis in Afghanistan no longer. Taliban is reemerging, is retaking territory in southern Afghanistan and kidnapping foreigners. As President, I will work with the other members of NATO to ensure that our forces and rules of engagement are robust enough to defeat the Taliban and protect the democratic government of Afghanistan. As part of this effort, I will commit additional American special forces to root out and shut down Taliban cells. Terrorists also take advantage when states don't do enough to stop them. We ought to use our tremendous tools, diplomacy, arms sales, trade, foreign aid, to get states to shut down terrorists. In Pakistan, the recent national intelligence estimate found that al-Qaeda had established a safe haven in the northwest tribal areas. We have given the Musharraf government billions of dollars of aid in the last several years, yet they've done little to get control over these areas. As President, I'll condition future American aid on progress by Pakistan, including strengthening the reach of police forces and working more effectively with tribal leaders and their members to ensure their acceptance of the government. But I want to be clear about one thing. If we have actionable intelligence about imminent terrorist activity and the Pakistan government refuses to act, we will. And Saudi Arabia is a country we have given too much to in return for too little. We must require the Saudis to do more to stop the flow of terrorists. Finally, you might be asking yourself, why is he giving this speech about terrorism and counterterrorism at a college, at a university, instead of a think tank? Why am I talking to a room that has a lot of young people in it instead of a room full of policy people in Washington, D.C.? Well, the answer to that is really very simple. I have spoken of the need to counter 21st century threats with 21st century strategies. To do that, we actually need 21st century minds. And that means we need the young people of America to be involved and engaged in this effort. And I say to every young person here, your country needs you. You may not agree, and I would certainly understand it. You may not agree with the decisions that got us to this place, and I hope you don't agree with the policies of George Bush. Everyone in this room knows that I don't agree with them. But we are in this struggle, and we're in it together. And America needs you now more than it ever has. While the Bush administration used this struggle to divide us, I'm asking you to rise to the challenges we face today and say something that presidential candidates don't usually say. Be willing to sacrifice. Be willing to sacrifice on behalf of this country that you love so much. It is time for us as Americans and for the young people of America to be patriotic about something other than war. It is time for us to join together. It's time for us to join together and make America what it's capable of being. Your country needs your help. Your country needs you to contribute in many ways, big and small. You can dedicate your life to this cause by joining our armed forces or an intelligence agency to help establish and execute the plan that I've talked about today. You can also join the Marshall Corps that I proposed to represent America abroad and help alleviate poverty that we know is a breeding ground for terror around the world. You can take the lead in helping bridge the cultural divide by learning to speak Arabic languages or another foreign language. You can work or volunteer for an NGO that fights global poverty. Or you can write and talk to your elected representatives to keep them honest and make sure that they're supporting smart policies that will help us end this war in Iraq. And we must end this war in Iraq. And it's these sacrifices from you and from Americans across America that will help restore this country's greatness. We must lead the world toward the future, and we must take up the mantle of moral leadership that served us so well in the past, in the pre-George Bush era. The campaign against terrorism will demand toughness and creativity, and it will take place in the shadows, in difficult terrain like the hills of Pakistan and the fields of Afghanistan, and in the hearts and minds of millions across the world. We have a choice today, and it rests in your hands. You are the generation who will help decide whether America will stick with the failed policies of the past or whether we'll actually aim for the horizon. Every generation of Americans has faced grave challenges. We've overcome great foes in the past, and we'll do it again. In the last century, we closed the chapters on Nazism, fascism, and communism through courage, bold new ideas, and strength. Today, we stand on the shoulders of the generations who faced those challenges in their own time and who rose to meet them. Just as they rose to meet the enemies they face, we rise to meet ours. And just as they did, we rise to meet them as Americans. So challenge your leaders. Challenge them. Hold them accountable for creating a safer world. And challenge yourself. Hold yourself accountable for creating a better America. That's what it means to be Americans, to reach, to keep on reaching, to never, ever stop reaching the best that any nation, to make America the best that it can possibly be. Do we have the vision to imagine a better world? Of course we do. Do we have the strength to protect our people? Of course we do. And do we have the guts to say, we know that this struggle is not just about our future. It is about your future, wherever you live, whoever you are. Of course we do. Robert Kennedy once said that each time we stand up for an idea, we send forth a tiny ripple of hope. And together, these ripples can build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. You can create that current, and you can start today. This is America, after all. We are more than a place. We are an idea that has changed the world and that will change it again and again. We are freedom, equality, and respect, a beacon once lit that cannot be put out. We are America, and the future is ours if we have the courage to make it so. Thank you all, and God bless you. Hey, Tom. Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Thank you.